Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Ari. In this conversation, we talk about Ari's gender journey, which is a light way of saying the process by which Ari was transitioned without really understanding why Ari was dysphoric in the first place, and also Ari's activism, which started out on the left and then became increasingly more conservative or right-ish, and what Ari is trying to do right now to raise awareness about this body modification cult that is still grinding up children who are mentally confused and processing their bodies to align with a mythic substance called gender. You can find Ari via the links below, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here's Ari.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? All things considered.
I'm gonna be okay.
I hope. One hopes.
I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I have the ability to weather it. That's why I did it.
Yeah. Well, should we get into what you did?
Yeah, sure. Let's get into it.
What should I call you? Is it Anna? Anna
Ari.
Ari? Ari. Okay. I don't know. I had Anna there. I think it's your Twitter name.
It is. It's kind of a stage name because my old name was Anna, and I have a lot of animosity.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I
we
get
made a
it.
pun off of my name. I don't know why my necklaces just constantly tangle up. It drives me crazy. Give me a second. Oh well. I've been
You
running
can.
around for days. They're tangled. That's
Yeah.
embarrassing.
Yeah. That's a symbolic, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know. The Saint Michael and my cross are just tied up together right now.
Yeah. Like that.
Yeah.
So, Ari, what's going on?
I guess I kind of cracked, you know? Like the past couple years have been really hard.
Yeah.
And I just snapped and started saying exactly what I think in the public.
Like
It's
with the bullhorn or.
Well, with the bullhorn, and then I upgraded it to an intercom system to save my voice.
Okay. So, you have a van, you just travel around King County.
Oh God, no. I'm actually an epileptic. I can't drive.
Oh,
So I got hit by a car in 2019, and I have a serious injuries from that. And I sued the Uber who hit me. So I have a good nest egg that I vested in the stock market during COVID. I'm married. My husband makes good money. So I actually pay Uber to drive me to my activism.
oh.
And I take public transit generally, or somebody drives me.
When did you start getting into activism? Like, what's your first memory of being an activist?
You know, actually, 2015 during Bernie's campaign,
Okay.
I was I was in the Midwest and I was kind of devastated. I'd been homeless for years, on and off. I was living with a disability. I was dirt poor. It had started at 449 a month, and then I was living at like 700, I think, 749. So not a lot. Like generally the rooms, if I could get one to rent, they took like 75% of my income, 80% of my income. And not being able to drive and existing in areas without public transit, I spent the rest of my income literally on rides to go get food and things like that. Um, so I was very poor and I had struggled a lot and been abused as a lot. I was a young trans-identified male when Bernie Sanders ran. And I saw this like a 30-minute video. I'd never like voted. I'd never participated in politics. I was raised by a conservative Republican family. Um, and I was raised Catholic. And when Bernie ran, I saw this video. It was like 30 minutes long. It was just a compilation of him talking about how bad people with disabilities have it and how bad the weakest in our country have it. And I actually volunteered for his campaign, started knocking on doors. Like I got heavily involved. When I saw Hillary Clinton collude with Debbie Wasserman Schultz to rig the first primary I was ever heavily involved in, it crushed me. I was completely disenfranchised. I actually protest voted third party in Michigan in 2016 over it. And I became kind of like a slightly center left person who really cared about Americans with disabilities and seniors and homeless issues. Um, I moved across the country and I got my seizures under control. I got my disabilities under control. I went back to school. I started volunteering at youth shelters. I cranked the volunteering up. I started at like 10 hours. I went to 20. I went to 30 until I was volunteering 40 hours a week at a youth shelter, doing deliveries for courier work and learning how to bake. And, I got hit by a car that really set things back. I couldn't go into baking. And COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I kind of started panicking because my roommate was a barista. He was in financial distress. I was in financial distress. Everybody was losing their jobs. And I got sucked into renters advocacy. So that's actually I was never a trans rights activist, but I was a tenants rights activist. I really cared about advocating to improve housing accessibility and reduce homeless issues. But I became very disenfranchised on the left. I had views that conflicted with the progressive establishment and the PNW. Um, big problematic views.
Really?
Like, yeah, huge ones. Like they got me labeled a Nazi eventually.
Okay.
Yeah, they called me a Nazi because like I was very gung ho about America. I was very jingoistic. I come from a military family. I love the military and I'm like very pragmatic as a person. So I'd be like, yeah, but like I'm gay and trans and like it's a choice between my country that is perfectly cool with gay people or Russia or China. So you don't have to like everything that the country does or the military does, but that's what we exist because they exist. We couldn't exist how we do anywhere else. And the whole Western world is protected by it. Because I used to say things like this, and that kind of set me at odds with the
Hmm.
liberals I worked with. I also said an open border is an insane policy, and no country has a completely deregulated border, which that's racist. Uh, you know.
Why do you think that the progressive side over the course of the last, I don't know, since 2010 to 2020 when it maxed out, and then afterwards, why is it like all or nothing? Why do you think that you have to align in all these issues or else you're out of the club?
I think really, I think we were already radicalizing, and I think social media has helped do that. The way social media interfaces with people, the blocking mentality, the anonymous communications, breaking down actual relationship structures in our society, in our neighborhoods, in the American family. I think that has an impact, and that was already starting to degrade things and push people to be more one or the other with no in between. But I think also, like the election that I participated in, there was a huge amount of demagoguing around Trump. Huge, massive amount of demagoguing around Trump. And initially, it was because they wanted to build him up because they saw him as someone easy they could eliminate. And then they had to eliminate him. And I think what they did inadvertently is they completely radicalized their base to the point where when I walk around at a protest, I'm not even wearing a MAGA hat. Yes, I voted for Trump, but nobody at these protests knows I voted for Trump. I'm wearing a tan suit, no party colors, and my only hat is a MAGA red hat that says make common sense great again. And people scream at me, they steal my hat, they call it a Mussolini hat. It's ridiculous how radical they are. And the party
Yeah.
did that to them.
Yeah. To this day, you're saying.
Yeah, to
And
this day, they're still just ranting about Trump being a fascist and
yeah.
a Nazi. And like, I mean, I'm I'm gay. I'm a gay American. So for me, and I'm very pragmatic, right? So I'm looking at it like, okay, where was the Republican Party when I was a kid? Well, the majority of the Republican Party was against gay marriage. The majority of the Republican Party was very evangelicalized. And that has benefits and that has negatives. And one of the negatives was the general sentiment towards just being gay. Like gay marriage came through in my 20s. And so I grew up thinking that like there was no shot of being a happily gay person with like a solid, committed love life. And Trump has come in and he's brought the Republican Party back to its libertarian roots. So, like, I saw a populist uprising on the left and a populist uprising on the right. And I saw everybody demagoguing the populist uprising on the right as a result of the Democratic Party's tactics. But the populist uprising on the right is actually a libertarian revival. Like Trump's gone in when he won, and he went in and removed every homophobic thing in the RNC platform. Their only issues are trans related, which I agree with them on that. So it's hard to see the party as taking this radical, crazy shift when you have the left behaving like the brown shirts. And you have the
Yeah.
right accepting libertarianism back as its core.
Are there conflicts between your identity and your political loyalties?
They're they're massive. Like that's partially what drove me to the right. Yeah, like being someone who's detrans, someone who came out of what I see as a cult, um, I'm completely ostracized from the left. Like even in our state, like there's a bill, House Bill 1038, that's completely frozen. They won't even hold a hearing on it because of Lori Jenkins, and she's a Democrat. Like in general, the Democrats in this area are completely co-opted and they've bought into trans ideology. I'm
What's the bill?
someone, House Bill 1038.
What is that? The
It's
content?
to ban gender affirming medical interventions for children in our state,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
they won't even have a hearing on it. And so as someone who like was taught this ideology at 17 years old, medicalized all the way, lived half my life this way, then got canceled by the left because of their stupid identitarian politics, right? Went and started questioning everything,
Yeah.
listening to TERFs and researching everything they said to me. I went all the way back to Magnus Hirschfeld, Havelock Ellis. I've read through transsexual history. I've read about how transsexualism became transgenderism. And to me, it's like where can I actually be heard? And it's not on the left anymore.
So you were 70. Do you mind if we get into the gender thing?
We
And then,
can.
okay. Where were you at 17 that you were in a position to be captivated by transgenderism?
Well, I went through years of sexual assault and mental and physical torture as a child. Um, I was misdiagnosed multiple times as a kid because the environment that I was in wasn't being described and told to the medical professionals who were trying to understand my behavior. That resulted in a lot of conflict in school and a lot of mental health issues. And I signed myself into an institution for a year and a half where I was diagnosed with PTSD. Um, and as an adult, they can't say if I am Aspergic, which is what they had thought I was, or if it was just trauma damaging how I interact socially. Um, I can't get a psychologist to re-diagnose me as autistic now. Um, so
What,
it's unknown.
just as
But
an aside, how would it be beneficial to have that diagnosis? Would that give you access to resources or?
no, it wouldn't actually be super beneficial. So I am ADHD. I can't get ADHD meds because there's conflicts between, the symptoms of these things. And so, like, it's hard to get diagnosed with ADHD, and it would be very beneficial for me to be able to get like some ADHD medication, but I can't. But not autism per se. People just like to label people with autism online.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yes, I do have a lot of autistic traits, most of which I've grown out of and were induced by trauma. So yeah, that's basically where that comes from.
Okay.
But I was this very confused, traumatized kid that was gay and hated his body. And I went into an LGBT center for help. I was volunteering nearby, and I'd found out that they offered free therapy, and I went in there and I mean, I was very conflicted. I thought that the reason I liked men and the way I liked men came from my childhood. I thought the way I felt about my body came from my childhood. And they really taught me gender as this framework for my body issues. And they told me a truth and a lie. They said that being gay is innate, but then they said that gender identity is innate and that the way I felt about my body could be that. And they put that in my head. And then they put me in a support group. And the support group was everybody's older than me. Like the closest person to me was 10 years older than me. The next person was 30 years older than me. I was a teenager, and the support group was filled with much older adults. And I was bouncing from place to place, sleeping on couches, renting a room, moving constantly. Like some of those early years, I moved 12, 13 times in a year. Sometimes right after paying rent, I moved. And like basically my only support network during that time of struggle was the LGBT center. And, I'd go in there into the support group whenever I could, and I'd just be surrounded by people telling me that, I felt just like you did when I was your age. And a lot of them had been in the military. They were veterans. They had wives and kids. And, they would tell me because like I came from a military family. I was like, I'm supposed to go and join the military. That's my duty as the oldest. And I was going to. But I wanted to get myself figured out first. I thought like I needed to do that. I couldn't just go into the military with all of these problems with my body and how I feel and hide that and repress that and just go and try to. I just thought that was irresponsible because of how volatile I felt about it. Um, so I tried to get help. And they would tell me, I joined the military, I served 20 years, and they'd be like, oh, I don't regret it, but I wish I had been able to make this decision when I was your age. And it would be a bunch of very old men with, male pattern baldness, and they're in their floral gowns. And I'm kind of like this vapid, vain, like little finicky gay boy. And I'm like, okay, well, this is the problem. Um, and I wasn't saying this, but internally I was like, well, if this is the problem, I need to castrate myself now because I can't be like that. I can't be like that. Like
Oh.
I don't have the strength to go into society looking like that. I was terrified of being bullied. I was constantly bullied in high school. They made nicknames about my name, about me sucking dick and liking men before I even accepted that I liked men. And that kind of layered onto the trauma of my childhood and made me shut down. And I looked at adult life and I just saw a future of me being bullied. I saw a future where it was just endless abuse. And I tried to run away from that. And gender was a great construct to let me run away from that. And interpreting my body issues through gender prevented me from getting help for over a decade and a half. And like now I have to do that work that I didn't do. And I made a whole bunch of permanent decisions based on the framework they gave me. And a lot of those decisions were made heavily influenced by that framework. Like I was fed this idea that this is the problem, this is the only solution. And if you don't take this solution, you run the risk of suicide. Well, I had tried to kill myself a lot as a kid to get away from my stepdad. And I felt true despair and tried to end my existence. And I was like, well, I have to take the treatment. And so, years down the road, on spironolactone and estrogen, when it started causing liver damage, that I was taking this antiquated anti-androgen, I was given the choice to detransition or go all the way. And, now I'm an adult and I've been living by this framework for 7 years. And I'm being told, well, you either detransition or have bottom surgery, but I'm an epileptic. So I couldn't have SRS at the time. And so it was an orchiectomy because the anti-androgens, just for some clarification, anti-androgens are a drug that stops your testosterone. And so if you don't have testosterone in your body anymore, you don't need anti-androgens. And long-term exposure to anti-androgens put me in this position of, well, now you have to either or stop. And stopping to me meant death, meant depression, suicide. I'll end up killing myself. It's impossible to stop because this is the treatment. And so I did that. And this is how I lived my life. Every decision I've made in regards to transition has been in this framework that I was taught and that I bought into as a young person. And so then after being canceled to go and read about where trans comes from, it's like retroactively painting my life with this black brush.
Wow. As an aside, what is your take on these middle-aged military men wanting to transition? Like, is this some sort of,
Autogynephilia.
is that activated by some sort of PTSD, you think?
So it's interesting, right? Because so autogynephilia is a paraphilia, and paraphilia can behave in a regressive way. So, but before I started actually accepting that I was detrans, when I was on this path of like desistance and calling myself ideologically desisted, I was interviewing men with AGP, and I met a young man named B. That's what we're going to call him as B. And B had this dream of being a woman at 15 or 16 that was very erotic. And he found transgender erotic literature and he found a story that worked for him. And he just remembered it. And that was his fantasy for when he pleasured himself. And one day, 17, going on 18, he realized this is not healthy and he repressed it and he stopped. He got a girlfriend, he had a baby on the way, he started his own company, he's got a luxury apartment, and COVID happens, right? He loses his business, he loses his luxury apartment, sleeping on a couch, still has the girlfriend, she's pregnant. The AGP comes back. The fantasy comes back as a cope because this is how paraphilia work. And there are other paraphilia that operate like this in either a fixated or a regressive way. And AGP does that as well. So sometimes men who have repressed this idea, who had it when they were younger, who are functioning in life, who get incredibly overwhelmed, have damage to their ego, self-esteem, extreme career loss, have it come back out. But like what B went through, when he had it come back out and he started expressing that, and then he started feeling dysphoric because AGPs develop autoandrophobia, he went to doctors, and the only solution the doctors gave him was to medicalize. But he didn't want to be a trans woman. He was like, I don't want to be a trans woman. So he ran away from that and he started looking for other help. But there were no doctors to treat him that he could find. So he ended up in the GC world. He ended up talking to Ray Alex Williams and I. He went full-blown repression, started treating it like an addiction. Fast forward a year later, I talked to him a couple months ago and he said he hasn't had the thought in months. He doesn't have the dysphoria anymore. He treated the AGP like an addiction. And this is the problem, is transgender ideology is lying to our society. It's hiding that autogynephilia exists, and autogynephiles are real people. They actually do sometimes want help, and there's an ethical quandary over whether it's okay to medicalize someone for a symptom when we know the cause and we're not diagnosing the cause. We're not offering treatments for the cause. And trans people get very upset when I talk about this. And I mean, I have some theater flair. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little theatrical. If you can't see by the protest version of me, I can be a little theatrical. But for me, my core motivation is detransitioners because the vast majority of males who end up cross-sex ideating, transitioning, and then detransitioning are AGP, and they've been harmed by this lie when they could have been given help.
Yeah. But that is distinct from your path.
Yeah, it seems like it. Like I questioned it a lot when I found out the typology. I thought I thought, well, is there a type of AGP that fit me? I even started talking to sexologists. I read Phil Illy's book, actually. It's right there,
Hmm.
Autoheterosexual, his reframing of AGP as a sexual orientation. I
Hmm.
read it. I consulted some doctors. I listened to the gay GP theory where AGP makes you gay. Um,
Hmm.
and I was really uncertain actually, but my GC counselor thinks that I was traumatized into transitioning, which I agree with. That lines up with how I feel about myself and like with my type of damage. And that bothers me even more. Like one, it bothers me that I was not diagnosed appropriately. They didn't look for the why I felt this way. And regardless of if it was AGP, which I don't think so, or if it was trauma-induced body dysmorphic disorder, which is what I'm being diagnosed with, um, regardless, I was lied to, and all of us are lied to. Um, and that's kind of where I'm at. You
Hmm.
know, it's it's really tragic that this is happening. And anybody who's young, regardless of male or female, and even the young AGP boys, they're all victims, all of them. They might go on to do bad things under these false belief sets. They may go on to use women's spaces or do other things that then make them perpetuating abuse on society. But they're all victims initially.
So, what's up with all this volunteering? What do you think
Oh, I've
what's
always
going
been
on
that
in
way.
SETI?
I was
Yeah,
raised
why?
Catholic. Like, look, when
Okay.
I was a teenager, I volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club teaching read. I used to read to kids actually before I was trans. I stopped when I started transitioning because I was like, I
Huh.
don't want to expose. I don't, you know. But
Hmm.
I used to get dressed up in like a polo and nice slacks, and I'd go to the Boys and Girls Club, and I'd sit there and I'd read Harry Potter to the kids, because Harry Potter really had a huge impact on me, and I'm not good at charging people for things. I'm not good at asking for money. I'm a terrible capitalist. Like, I love capitalism. I'm a terrible capitalist. I'm good at investing, terrible capitalist. Like,
Yeah.
the worst businessman ever. I just want to give it away. That's just,
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I never developed that as a kid, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I'm really good at investing, but I'm not really good at valuing my time
You're very
and
service
equipment
oriented in your
money.
values.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there must have been a gap between being an activist for the left and being an activist in your current capacity. When
Oh
did you
yeah.
when did you start to speak out
So when I
again?
was canceled, at first I went online and I tried to look for other people like me. So I was literally like, okay, I'm looking for the homosexuals who call themselves transsexuals, who are older generations, who are the true trans. And so, like, originally, my first shift in activism wasn't like left to right, Democrat to Republican. I was like this independent purple person who was just trying to organize the trans people around trans medicalism and bring back some rigid gatekeeping, but still allow it all. I
Hmm.
was very much more in line with Brianna Wu, actually. Um, and what happened is I started organizing the old school transsexuals, and I realized, well, actually, like AGP and HSTS just applies through this cleanly. And all the old school, like AGP goes all the way back. It's not like this new thing, it's very old. And so I started reading a lot more, and I was still organizing the transsexuals, but there was a lot of drama. There were things that happened along the way. The group I interacted with became gayer, less AGP.
Hmm.
Um, and I kept researching. And what I ended up doing is actually researching myself out of a trans identity because I learned how I was lied to, why I was lied to, and the historical lead up to that lie. And I became completely disenchanted. And all along the way, I was slowly shifting to the right. And you can go look at my Twitter. It was made when I made a podcast called Truthful TS, and you can see me just shift slowly. to the day that I put on a MAGA hat. And the day that I put on a MAGA hat was the day that I realized there was no hope for me on the left because I was starting to desist from the ideology altogether, from
Wow.
all of the ideologies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because everybody has a framework for why they're doing this. It's not
Yeah.
all the same. Some people subscribe to the social construct of gender. Some people believe in cross-sex brain theories and like older views of old school transsexualism. But they all have this framework. And I kind of moved between these frameworks, researching them as I went to realize that it's all fabricated. It's all a lie.
All of it.
All of it. There's no such thing as true trans. Transsexualism was literally invented. It was invented. It was invented by Magnus Hirschfeld and Havelock Ellis and other academics in the early 1900s when they thought homosexuality was sexual inversion during the rise of fascism in Europe, when you couldn't be gender nonconforming. You couldn't be an effeminate gay man. You couldn't be a masculine lesbian. You'd get put in an institution or in a concentration camp. You'd get spotted immediately and targeted. It was a different time. And actually, one of the fathers of transsexualism was a gay, nonconforming man, Magnus Hirschfeld. He was known as Aunt Magnolia in the cross-dresser scene. So if you think about it, he's a gay man. He's known as Aunt Magnolia in the cross-dresser scene. So like today, in today's day and age, the father of transsexualism would just be effeminate. He'd maybe have some makeup on or some stylish clothes, but it wouldn't be a problem for him to be an effeminate gay man. But he existed in a time where this is sexual inversion, it's a paraphilia or a mental disorder. He can't express himself at all. And all of his expression is bottled up into Aunt Magnolia. This thing that happens when he's in these private places that have security where like the fascists can't come and get him, you know? And so I think he had this framework that's very hard for modern people to relate to. And he thought, well, let's make the effeminate gay men look like masculine women, and we'll make the masculine women look like feminine men. And that way they'll appear straight and they can exist. And that's where it came from. And primarily the subjects were homosexual in the early years, up until Jorgensen came back from World War II with a sex change surgery. And then he hit national news. And that surgeon was flooded with letters from autogynephiles who wanted to transition, and some gay men with trauma who wanted to run away from being gay men, and some lesbians who wanted to be able to marry their wives and have normal lives, but primarily autogynephiles. And then if you look at trans history between that moment in the 1950s to now, the majority of trans identified males throughout history are autogynephiles. So that we go around with this construct of gender that we really fabricated in the 70s and 80s and then codified into law in the 90s as an explanation for all of this, when autogynephilia is so prevalent and real, it's so wrong. Our society is, in my view, our society has been completely co-opted by a false narrative of transgender.
Why is there such a strong negative reaction to autogynephilia in among onacotophiles?
It's the stigma. It's an extremely stigmatized paraphilia. It grosses people out. It bothers people. Everybody remembers, if you're old enough, the old transvestites from back in the day walking around, and and also you have to remember, like, men couldn't used to do they didn't used to be able to do this. Like the old transvestites were like successful lawyers. They were men who had successful careers and wives and children, and they lived as men most of the time, right? They had to hide their presentation primarily, and the only AGPs who transitioned were those who slipped through the cracks or manifested young or were in one of these other demographics of AGPs, because it's not like one thing. It's very diverse, autogynephilia. And so like what people think of when they think of autogynephilia is the 65-year-old transvestite with a shelf full of silicone women faces, and they're posing with a selfie stick on social media. That's what people think of when they think of autogynephilia. They don't think of like Brianna Wu. They don't think of They don't think of like a autistic, spurgic, bisexual who's like really conflicted and confused. They don't think about those people. And nowadays in our modern society where we have all of this hypersexualized imagery of women, we have video games, we have anime pushing cross-sex gender themes, we have manga pushing cross-sex gender themes. These boys are feeling very uncomfortable much younger. AGPs used to transition at after 27, 28. They were in their late 30s, 40s, and gay boys would transition much younger. Now both are transitioning much younger under the framework of transgender, and you could argue that that's potentially by design.
By design, how? Like for
Because
profit
they
motive,
completely
or?
buried the diagnostic standards. They completely removed AGP from gender dysphoria. And now, instead of trying to treat these boys, they're just medicalizing them as soon as they manifest. So, like, I have a friend who's detrans, and he started having some like AGP feelings over anime and video games at 13 years old. And he went to the doctors and told them, he was like, yeah, so like I get excited. And he was very honest with them, and he ended up with a gender dysphoria diagnosis, and he ended up castrated. And he was devastated. He didn't develop a full sex drive, and by 16 he had kind of lost the desire to feel that way. um, but he's castrated, so
Yeah.
there's nothing to be done. And the fact of the matter is these AGPs are constantly advocating for children to transition on the basis of how we end up looking. They'll be happier because they'll be prettier. Like Brianna Wu did tweets about this, where he was like, if you want to see more Hunter Schafers, you have to support puberty blockers for children. And that was directly appealing to this notion that when we transition younger, people end up prettier and then they end up happier. That's a lie. They do end up prettier. They don't end up happier. That's a
Why
lie.
wouldn't they end up happier? Isn't
Well, because you're still
prettiness like the
you're still
core
living a lie.
of
You're
happiness?
still
Okay.
living a lie. A lot people don't just detrans because life gets hard or they're unhappy. You're living a lie, and that's what does it. Sometimes the nails on the chalkboard, the cognitive dissonance gets to be too much. Life events add up. Like I have a lot of friends, and this is the narrative the trans community pushes, is that people come to this position because of botched surgeries, because of like a failed transition. I'm married to a man who makes six figures. I have a Tiffany ring on my finger. Like I'm well off. I've got the white picket fence with two dogs. I have a lot of friends who are detrans who are just like that. A lot of them are way prettier, and they still ended up detrans because they were living a lie, and the cognitive dissonance got to be too much. And like it's wild to me that our society thinks that this is innate and equates it to being gay, because did you know that you'll lose your gender identity if you get dementia?
That is a terrible thought for all these transitioners.
You don't lose being gay. So if I get dementia in my 70s or 80s or whatever, God forbid, I will remember that I like men, and I'll remember that I'm a man. I won't remember why I cut off my dick. And gender identity is something you lose when you lose your mind, but sexual orientation is not. Like what we're doing is medicalizing people's dreams, their feelings.
Which are ephemeral.
They are. They're
Yeah.
very ephemeral. And like I think it is a medical condition. I think it's a mental illness. But I think it's multiple. I think it's autogynephilia. I think it's body dysmorphic disorder from trauma being misdiagnosed. I think there's a lot of internalized homophobia that's not even looked at. And like when you look at the gay community who transitions, that's the real tragedy of it. Like we don't look into why gay kids want to transition. There's not a lot of research on that. There's thousands of articles about autogynephilia, the thing that supposedly doesn't exist. But there's very little about why gay kids transition. And a lot of the stuff that does exist is new. And it's being done by the gender critical community, because the gender critical community sees right through this fraud. That's why they're gender critical. They know autogynephilia is real. They know that gender identity is not.
Why do you think what do you think is the motivation for homosexual transsexualism?
I think it's a couple things. Like over half of the gay people I know who have transitioned have been SA'd as children. I think that when you're non-conforming in a stereotypical heteronormative world, you can develop mental complexes around being a failure as a man or a failure as a woman because you just don't add up to what society wants you to be. Um, and I think you can internalize the hatred of being a gay man or a gay woman and want to run away from what you are. Like literally a mentality of trans the gay away, which I used to have. I have very severe internalized homophobia. Um,
How do you how do you process that, this internalized homophobia?
what do you mean? How do I process it?
How have you gotten to a place where you're okay with who you are?
I kind of actually go back and forth on it. Sometimes, yeah, enough that I can go out in public and call myself a gay man, and see myself that way. But I also have like, I'm ripped away from the gay community. You know, I say you can't trans the gay away because I'm a man and I still like men, and that's technically gay. But in a way, I did trans the gay away. I don't exist as a part of the gay community. Um, my body is not something that any gay man will ever want again. And so it's like, yes, technically gay, but ruined.
That is a very strong formula. Ruined.
Well, you know, I don't have a body that any gay man would ever want. So I'm not perceived as a gay man generally. Like, people can't get my pronouns right. I'm married to a man, happily in love. And I'm like not shaving my head. I like having long hair. He likes me having long hair. I'm very medicalized. So even in my suit, people are like, they don't know. So like people repost me and think a woman's being attacked. So like in society, I guess I'm very disconnected and ripped apart. And like I have to recognize that like if God forbid something happened to my husband and I lost him, it wouldn't be the gay men like that want me ever again. So technically gay, but ruined.
How do you interact with society that seems to present you with dysphoric signifiers, like all this misgendering or difficulty reading
I don't
you?
have dysphoria anymore.
You don't have dysphoria. Yeah. So I want. That's the question. Why you don't have dysphoria anymore, but society's constantly prompting it from you.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
So dysphoria comes from cross-sex ideation. I don't have cross-sex ideation, so I don't have discomfort at like how I'm not a woman or like being perceived as a man. And I know what I am, and I'm confident in myself as a man. So it doesn't really bother me that like some people think I'm a woman. It's just like, okay,
Okay.
well, whatever. Like I get it. Like I've been very medicalized. I have some mannerisms. Like if you just see me walking down the road and from behind or something, like, it is what it is. That happens to gay men all the time, to be honest. Like if you saw a short gay man with long pretty hair like on his tippy toes and skinny jeans kissing another man from behind, you'd probably just think you were seeing a girl kiss a guy, until you came around and saw his face or saw more of him, like, oh, that's a effeminate man. The difference is that my body has been so medicalized that there's less of the tells as you walk by. Um, I don't I like if I went to a gay bar, I'd probably be perceived as a creepy person that shouldn't be there because, like I'm not, I'm technically gay.
Well, I mean, in time, I could perceive that your social position within the gay community might change because of an influx eventually of detransitioned gay men.
Maybe, maybe there is a wave coming.
Yeah. It sounds like a tremendous amount of psychological effort to accept what's happened to you and to go through the process of healing from that. What are some of the ways that have where's solace found for you? Where's comfort found for you? Where's strength found for you?
You know, I was running on rage for a while, not gonna lie. Um, I actually equated how I felt to like the rage turfs when turfs like first peak and go into that like rage turf phase. And I honestly thought that I was just gonna be rage detrans phase for like the next year and a half. Especially after the first Riley Gaines event, like that I attended, that Riley Gaines event.
Was that
But
the one where
when
she was sequestered at a college?
it was University of Washington on May 6th. There was the riots the night before that caused $1 million in damage to the new engineering building on the UW. They had to relocate the event, and like I couldn't get in. Like I just ended up outside counter protesting, and like I thought I was just going to be okay. Well, I'm so angry and so hurt, and I'm channeling that into trolling them. And that's what I did with the Riley Gaines thing. I was just like, I kind of snapped and I went to go troll them. And then I saw them attack the Christians in the park. And I have very conflicted faith. Um, but I was raised Catholic and I believe in the freedom of religion. I'm very diehard about the American Constitution. And I went to the prayer rattle, and that's where I was assaulted. And it's funny because after I was assaulted, and I was like kind of in the media area on the balcony above, looking down, they were singing. And sorry,
The Christians were?
promised a friend I wouldn't cry on camera because people will just take a picture of it and drag it around. So I'm just gonna suck that one up. But I started weeping on the balcony. I started thinking about my family, and it was comforting to see all those people down there standing up for the right thing. And I went to church that weekend, actually, for the first time in a long time for an actual service. I went into a church like a year ago when I first started feeling really conflicted with a friend, and I just sat there and cried. And I didn't participate in a service or anything, and then I left. And this Sunday, I went in for a service, and it was about Jonah and running away from God's command to tell the people that they were wicked and being swallowed by a whale. It's very, very ironic. And the church sent their security member to come pick me up, and I could put my gun down for a few hours and go to church and pray. And I just sat there and cried. And I thought about redemption and how to forgive myself. And so I guess I'm actually ironically finding comfort in religion.
That's why that's why it didn't sound right when you said you were ruined. It doesn't sound like that's true. Damaged, I could I could see that's true, but ruined, who knows? Only God knows that.
You know, I don't have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. But thank you for sharing that. You are now, so you put your gun down, but you picked it back up,
Have
apparently.
to. I
Yeah.
can't, that's actually a literal gun.
Okay.
I've not been able to go out in public unarmed since the prayer rattle. I get death threats and threats on Twitter every day. Some autogynephiles got my legal name, my birth name, my address, my phone number, and build out a bot network. And there's like 100 accounts with procedurally generated names using like Speak to get around the bans. Like they'll say my address as like a poem, and some of it will be numbers and some of it won't be. And it's under every single post of mine. It's under all of the posts about me, wherever there's a video of me. So they've been doing their best to, and a lot of them are slandering me as a criminal or things like I have no criminal record or anything like that, obviously. But they're trying. They're trying to shock me, to haze me. Um, and, it is what it is. I'm an American. I believe in my Second Amendment rights. I'm armed to the teeth. I'm a redneck from the South. So I've always had a concealed carry and I've always had a pistol. I don't usually carry everywhere, but I do now. So that's the change. It's not a big deal.
Why would they persecute you?
Because I'm exposing autogynephilia to the general public. And they know that when the public knows what caused trans and how we got here, they won't support it. Because what we're doing today was not advocated for and established from a position of honesty. They were not honest with society when they built out the medical framework for transitioning people today. And there's not really much to do about that other than turn it off, and they are going to have to advocate through honesty if they want to turn it back on. And they know that I go beyond just saying no transitioning children. I think it's completely unethical to transition anyone without diagnosing the why they feel this way. Completely unethical. Um, I would like to see evidence for every path to cross-sex ideation that this is the only treatment and that this is necessary. Argued from a position of honesty with society. I want their social contract broken. I want transition shut down. And if it's going to be reestablished, it should be reestablished from a position of honesty.
That is a hard line.
Yeah, well, but every day we leave that faucet on as another ruined life or damaged person. However, whatever framing people want to take, people are having their bodies cut open by doctors without being ex diagnosed with why they feel this way. And that's not ethical. When you go to a doctor, you're appealing to authority. You don't have the medical knowledge to understand necessarily what you need. If a doctor tells you that this is the framework, this is what's wrong with you, this is the treatment, this is all you can do, you're going to roll with that. They're lying to people.
What, at this point in time, what would be sufficient evidence for the need to medically transition? Like,
Well, so I think of this from like a mental health framework, right? We don't tell someone who has anorexia, oh my God, girl, you know what? You're fat. Nobody's giving Eugene Cooley liposuction, you know? Like nobody's telling her that she's fat.
why wouldn't they?
We
Why wouldn't
don't
they
do that.
affirm that? Like,
Well,
why doesn't that idea work on the anorexic, but it works on the transgender?
Well, because like the anorexic is 80 pounds and thinks they're fat and they're dying and starving themselves and damaging their health because they think that they're fat. So we don't go, yes, you are fat. Let's give you some medical interventions. And you have people who have autogynephilia or internalized homophobia or trauma from CSA who are mentally unwell, who are struggling, who are unhappy with their bodies, who are depressed, who are agoraphobic, who are suicidal. And we're going, that's because you're a girl. You're right. Let me give you some estrogen. You can castrate yourself, grow some gynecomastia, and LARP as a woman in society. And we'll hinge all of your stability on society affirming to you that you're a woman at the cost to actual females who are the most vulnerable in our society. Females and children, the most vulnerable in our society, you know? And so for me, it's like, this is not logical. It's not logical to affirm mental illness. It's not logical to affirm a software problem with a hardware solution. You know, we don't solve software problems by rebuilding the computer. We fix the software. We don't need to medicalize mental illness with permanent body modifications and then ask society to affirm that delusional state lest the man who thinks he's a woman lose his mind.
Well, I mean, there's so many different issues with the transition because once you embark on that path, it's never going to end. Once you perceive it as life-saving care, then you get the estrogen, you get the softer skin, maybe you'll do some laser hair removal, but then you'll start fixating on your jawline, so you'll break your jaw, and then you'll start fixating on your voice, and you'll slice your neck open and have to go through that, and then all the other destructive surgeries, and it never ever ends. But what doesn't end, or what keeps it going, is this thought: this is life-saving care. This is
Mm-hmm.
life-saving care. What is life? That needs, like, what about life is being saved by
And
destructive surgery? It doesn't add up for me.
what's crazy is that the idea that this is life-saving care is disproven by trans history. That's fabricated. If you go back through what the WAPATH standards were originally supposed to be based on, to the Henry Benjamin standards, and you pull up Henry Benjamin's severity chart, it's got six types with pseudo transvestism all the way on the bottom. And then he used the term true transsexualism on type 6 for those who wanted bottom surgery. The only people that had a symptom notation of suicidal ideation or body mutilation were that type 6 category. And, you know, we don't know exactly how big the type 6 category is, right? We don't know. But we do know is that the lower categories are exponentially bigger and it gets smaller as you move up the ladder. And statistically, only 4% of trans identified males, who are the original patient demographic, very few women transition throughout history, statistically, only 4% of trans identified males get surgery today. So the percentage of males who definitely fall into that type 5, 6 category is only 4% of the trans identified males. So the actual observed suicide rate when Henry Benjamin studied it was 4% of the males who cross-sex ideate. Somewhere maybe a little more, give or take, very small amount. Now, after spreading this idea that this is life saving, that people will commit suicide if they're not affirmed, we see people literally acting suicidal, behaving suicidal, feeling suicidal thoughts because it's contagious. It's a social contagious thought. Like, and anybody who works in mental health will tell you how suicidality as a cyclical thought can be contagious,
Why do you
especially
think
among
that?
especially among kids.
Why
Because
suicide?
I talked to a
Yeah.
lot of doctors about it. When you think that this is a risk, that all of these feelings will build up to suicide, you basically create that path in your brain, and you do build yourself up to suicide. You can create that outcome for yourself by thinking, well, this is the outcome. This is the risk. This is something I'm going to experience because of this. You know, because like I felt suicidal before the ages of 12. The first time I ever tried to cut my wrist open, I was like 8 years old, and I vertically slit my wrist all the way up. Um, but I actually used a science slide from a microscope to slice my wrists open at 8 years old. And that was because of the despair, the isolation, wanting to escape the environment I was in, seeing no escape, praying to God to kill me, to give me freedom from what he was doing to me, which is something I did a lot as a kid. I didn't have that when I got free of him. I actually wasn't suicidal between like 13, 14, 15, 16. I didn't really start getting suicidal again and experiencing these extreme depressive episodes until I started cross-sex ideating and using gender as a framework for everything and thinking that suicide was the consequence and looking back at my life being like, okay, well, I've thought that before. So this might be like, a real
Oh
thing. And then
gosh.
going on estrogen, which increases your rates of anxiety and depression. I had such extreme clinical anxiety through most of my life that I've had to be on something to reduce my heart rate. The first time I did public speaking, my heart rate went from 60 BPM to 145 BPM, like I was running full sprint, and they had to put me on propanolol, a high dose of propanolol, just to keep my heart rate down. I have high amounts of cortisol that get released in my system because I've been through that kind of trauma. And so I'm already like a very high strung, very stressed, anxious person. And on estrogen, that's much worse. Since I went off, I felt a lot more stable, a lot less
Yeah.
anxious.
Yeah.
And this is an observed symptom of estrogen. So I think you take kids who are already experiencing anxiety and depression, and you put them on drugs that increase their anxiety and depression, and then you tell them that suicide is a potential consequence of not being affirmed. You're dealing with a child that's going to go right to their head. And I've talked to enough parents with trans kids who have detransitioned to know that many of their kids have used suicide as an emotional bullying tactic. 14-year-old girls, I'm going to kill myself if you don't let me transition, stuff like that. That's what the doctors are putting into people's heads.
What's the medical consequence of detransition for you?
The medical consequence of detransition. So, like, it's like, what is detransition, right? My genitals are removed. I can take some tea. I can't take a high dose of tea. I don't have the organ to regulate it. I have to be on an exogenous hormone, an external hormone, to function now. Um, like, I'm not going to have more surgery. Detransition isn't necessarily about like forcing yourself to adhere to a stereotype. It's not about more medicalization and surgery. It's about accepting yourself, trying to find peace with where you are in your body after what was done, after coming out of the mindset that caused this to happen, because you lose that mindset and then you're left like, what did I do? And so detrans is about deprogramming, moving past gender as a framework, and finding peace with the body that you have now.
Yeah.
So I'd say that detrans is very good for my health and my mental health, but my physical health, it hasn't really made it worse because there's not a lot of medical elements of it. My physical health is trashed from trans, and it'll stay trashed.
Is there, have you, with regard to like peer support, it seemed like peer support is kind of what prompted you getting into this mess. Is there sufficient, adequate, or a need for detrans support groups, or do you
Oh
think it's
God,
even a
yeah.
good idea for them to be bottled up together? I mean, there's all these different questions about how it would
And
be properly orchestrated, but
it's hard because everybody's in a different place. They come to it for different reasons and there's different ideologies. So that's where it gets a little complicated, especially when, you take AGP into account. But yes, support groups, 100%. When I first came to this realization, someone who's a friend now told me that he watched the light in my eyes go out. I was streaming regularly. I was interviewing people. He watched the light in my eyes go out. And he reached out to me because he saw that and he saw where I was at. Um, and, Richie became like my best friend. He's one of the few people in the world I trust to like talk to about how I feel truly. And he helped me through like one of the worst parts of my life. And I'm grateful for that. And I think that young people who are leaving this call should have support groups with other people like them. 100%. I think it's very helpful to not feel alone while you are trapped in a surgically modified body after leaving a cult.
why subject yourself to the insanity that is trans rights activism? at this moment of healing that you're going through?
Because my husband makes six figures, and because I got hit by an Uber and invested in the stock market in 2021, and I can afford to cash out a couple $1,000s. I mean, I just cashed out like 20K to fund this, and um, I have a lot of friends who can't. Like I have a lot of friends who are in this position and can't do this. Like they can't. They're going like what I'm going through, having all of my information leaked, having Antifa show up at my house, like having all of these police situations, having all of these death threats, losing a job. I've lost multiple jobs over the past few years, and been hazed everywhere by trans-identified males. So it's like I can do it, and it's not going to cost me as much as it would cost them. And I'm 34. Most of the people I know who are trans are younger than me. Um, and they just they don't have the ability, and it's terrifying. And somebody has to. Um, so I'm going to.
Is the justice system treating you fairly? Being
Oh, like
helpful?
the Oh God, the police are great. Like, I don't think cops buy into this nonsense at all. Like, I mean, look, you can't work as a police officer for more than a couple years, I bet, without running into a nasty, nasty transvestite. Like they know what autogynephilia is when I bring it up, and I see their faces when I argue with these men. Like they know what's going on, but they're there to protect and serve. They do their jobs. They're not there to speak those kinds of opinions, and that's kind of part of what it means to
Yeah.
be a police officer. So I'm not saying every cop is GC, but it seems like a lot of them are, and they do their best to hold everybody accountable on both sides. And it just so happens that Antifa and Trantifa are the violent ones. It's not the Christians, rallying against child sex trafficking or castrating kids. It's not them. It's not the detransitioners getting violent. We may say things they really don't like hearing, but we're not violent.
Well, I mean, unless words are violent, which
Words are not
sometimes they,
violence.
which we can draw that line there. Yeah, I was at a turf event in Seattle. The public library, I think it was last November, got assaulted.
I
I'd
found out
never
about
felt.
that last minute.
Oh yeah,
I wanted to go. I was like, oh man, I wish I
you
could have
missed
gone.
it.
That was the first moment I thought I could go out and like protest the trannies protesting the turfs. Sorry.
They were. I've never been so angry as watching my wife get pushed around and then being spat on and shoved. And I was just like, I want to destroy this whole thing. I want to destroy them. I went full Napoleon for a moment, and then I kind of like let it go. But I'd never felt so angry.
That's why I go up there and I read them for filth for being big back linebackers for real. Disgusting what they do. It's really
Yeah,
disgusting.
it doesn't because I remember pre-pandemic, like on the eve of the pandemic, there was a similar event at the same place. That was like I think it was like February of 2020, and there was a big march, and it had the full backing of like the Seattle stupid ass commie city council, and they marched there, and it was this big protest against these turfs, and Megan Murphy and Kara Dansky and a few others were just having a meeting. And but last November, the group that was protesting, these Trantifa people, were so much smaller. They didn't have institutional backing anymore, and the cops were much quicker to be on the scene and then able to just by sheer numbers control that crowd. So I think it's going out of fashion, but maybe you have a different point of view on that.
I, I think it's going out of fashion for the police, But I don't think it's going out of fashion for the other legs of the justice system in Seattle, at least. I
Hmm.
mean, the Antifa member who assaulted me, stole my camera, and then assaulted a cop, which is a felony, was let out the next day. Like, they didn't even hold him for 72 hours. He's a repeat offender. He was arrested for violent Antifa actions in 2024 when Trump won, you know? And so, like, to me, like, the cops are doing their job. Like, they're done with it. But the rest of the justice system and the politicians, they're not done with it. I mean, Mayor Harrell was calling those Christians right-wing extremists. There was nothing extreme about them. I was walking among them. I was a detrans gay guy talking to them. They were good people. There were Jewish people there. Like, I'm part Jewish and I'm Christian, but like, like, it was a mixed crowd. There were liberals and conservatives. Like, it's absurd that the establishment in the city is so co-opted by this narrative, and it's because they're scared. They're scared to take a position because they're scared it'll cost them elections. But you know what's going to really cost them elections? Supporting the castration of children.
Yeah, the mayor, no, the governor just flew that flag that I flip off every time I see it in a Starbucks window. I can't help but say, "Oh, there's the child mutilation cult." Fuck you.
Yes. It's
That's what
like,
I
yeah.
see.
So all I see is a flag made by an AGP veteran, late Han, specifically designed to use baby blue and baby pink, tied to the gay community. And it sucks because this has opened the door for other paraphilia to be given civil rights protections because that's what they did by tacking the T onto sexual orientations. So now the gay community is basically acting as the open door to reframe paraphilia as comparable to sexual orientations.
What do you think is the vector of challenging this? I think I don't know to what extent it's at the forefront of all the political activity that's going on, but I do know that California, Washington, and I don't know to what extent Oregon is following along, but they don't seem like brave people down there. At least the politicians, they'll go wherever California takes them. But like, what is the demographic that needs the most information about this or outreach about this?
I
And
think
how do they need to be outreached?
I think the Conservative Party needs to be activated around this issue in swing states. I think we need to start flipping seats, gender critical. I think Democrats need to realize that they will lose seats because of this issue, in order to shift them on this issue. And then I think we need to open the statute of limitations for medical lawsuits, and expand it specifically in regards to trans medical interventions to
Especially under
match with the
18. Yeah.
average regret rate. The average regret rate from transitioning is 8 years. So we should have 8 years for statute of limitations. It's like Layla Jane, ideated at 11 because of social media, had a double mastectomy as a little girl at 13 years old, started coming out of it at 16, 17, started suing, was forced into arbitration because of contracting with Kaiser, and basically went in arbitration, fell on statute of limitations, which was 3 years. She's 20 now. Double mastectomy at 13, 20 now. No justice achievable because of the way our laws are written around this. If we expanded it to the average regret rate, 8 years, she would have been able to get justice in arbitration.
Do you think Washington is cooked, as the kids say, or do you think that there's hope for this
I think
state that we
Washington is
share?
going to be a war to unify the parts of Washington that voted against this and to flip enough seats to push it. I really do think that, like, the average person on the left is not malicious in supporting this. I think they just don't understand what they're supporting. And I think when they start to understand what they're supporting and they start to realize they will lose votes, that they will lose seats, they'll shift. Washington State is basically controlled by the liberal elements around the Puget.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
only real way
Yeah.
to fix this in our state, especially since they codified gender identity into the constitution of the state, is going to be radically changing the state. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's cooked without radical change.
Yeah. And there are that Puget Sound shitlib utopia. I'm sorry. I try this particular topic brings out my opinions, and I try to keep my interviews free of opinions, but I have
No,
strong opinions
no,
about
I
this.
like knowing your opinions. That's a good one.
But they're so locked into a number of different issues that if this one is questioned, then other ones will be questioned. I mean, this is a state that wants to provide, well, actually, they say they want to provide black citizens reparations through housing loans, free housing loans. But actually, that all that money that they're spending is just going to NGOs. It's basically to support the black middle class. It's not to actually support poor black people. So this is a state that actually is participating in reparations for slavery when there was no even black people allowed in this state when slavery was legal. So that doesn't even make sense. So the trans thing is the progressive mindset has tied all these issues into a big ball. And
Yeah.
any deviation from any one of them sacrifices your status in the whole entirely. So I don't know how to move the needle on that, but I do know that more and more Democrats, liberals, progressives are waking up to this. And it takes a particular type of person that's willing to sacrifice status for the truth in order to pursue like the logical outcomes of this, and then to start speaking out about it. And I've watched these little turf groups kind of pop up, and there's always a conservative or two, and the conservative has to apologize. There's still that kind of like the liberals have to stop being so full of them fucking selves, because it's like because they think that it's just this one issue, but everything else we're totally right about, and you're a bigot to think any of these other things. So open borders, reparations, transing kids. They have to like give on one, and it makes them have to actually question all these other things, and they're
Yeah.
not ready to do that. They're kind of painted into a corner. So how many more children need to be sacrificed on the altar of them being kind for them to actually like take off that that list of "in this house we believe" mantra religion that's it's self-contradictory
I
anyway.
I'd argue that they're not kind. I think they're nice.
Hmm.
People here are very nice.
Yeah.
They'll see you sleeping on the side of the street, shooting heroin in your arm, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're not a bad person. You're okay. I can here have $5. Let me walk past you, and I'll make sure that the cops don't bother you, and I'll
Yeah.
advocate for no institution to treat you, and
Yeah. Here's a
you
clean
deserve
needle.
to be able to just lay there and sleep outside."
Yeah.
Without being bothered. But like kindness, like loving someone, if you care about someone, you don't let them sleep outside and shoot themselves up. Like if my brother was shooting up heroin and homeless right now, I would fly across the country and drag him out of it by his hair, even if I had to put him in my guest bedroom. And we never talk. And I'd still do it, because I love him. And that's the difference between like being nice and being kind. And people here will smile and be super polite and nice, but they're not actually kind. Kindness would be bringing back state institutions with rehab wings so people can get treatment for drug addiction. Like kindness would be actually spending money on building the infrastructure to get us out of the homeless problem instead of just wasting it all on NGOs.
Yeah.
So all
That's
of the
all it
rich
is.
white people can go sit in the NGO and feel good about themselves while they distribute crack pipes.
This unintentionally turned on a Let's Bash Washingtonians stream, but I mean,
Oh, it did.
they,
I'm so sorry.
well, you're the one who brought up Jonah, so we're just like, we're
Look,
following.
$145,000 a year to distribute crack pipes and calling it harm reduction is a perfect example of how stupid this whole group think around progressivism is. Like giving people crack pipes is not kindness.
Jeez. Ari, what are you working on? I mean, how are your legal troubles? How can people support you? But what are you actually working on? What do you do that people can hook up with your content or your work?
Well, right now I'm working on organizing with gender criticals in the state. I'm hoping to lobby the government in our state, and I'm hoping to lobby the federal government on these issues. I'm booting up a podcast called The Apostates Table, where we're going to be highlighting testimony, where we will be highlighting legislation across the country, and highlighting politicians that support the castration of children.
Hmm.
Um, and so you can follow that on YouTube. I'll post it on my Twitter when it launches here in the next
Yeah.
week or
When do you
so.
think it'll? Couple
In the
weeks?
next
Yeah.
week, yeah. We have to go out of town on the 12th, and we're launching when we get back on the 16th. Um, so I will post it on my Twitter, which is transphobe01. And that's also where you can go see me do crazy things at protests, like scream at Antifa and let them know that trans women are autogynephiles and men.
Wow. Ari, I'm sorry for your troubles, but it's, oh man, I'm gonna use that progressive bullshit term. It's good trouble, I guess.
It is good trouble.
Yeah.
We really need to turf the vote. That's what we need. We need to turf the vote, and we need to get all of the gender criticals and all the detransitioners together, and we need to aggressively lobby to flip seats GC. Whether they're blue or red, they need to
Hmm.
be gender critical. That's what we should do. We should turf the vote.
It can be a cross aisle issue, even though I did kind of lay some heavy words at the feet of liberals, but it can be a cross seat issue. It can. It has to be.
It has to be.
Yeah. But I
Should
really appreciate
not be
you.
a party issue to not castrate kids.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the framework around which our politics operates needs a really deep clean and a reboot, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. But little wedge issues like this, Jesus,
It's
like
okay.
putting a child between the millstone rather than the millstone around the child castrator's neck is where we're at right now, and maybe the thing needs to be switched a little bit. Again, I'm using strong language. I don't really want to actually wood chipper any of the people who are doing this, because maybe they are nice. They're just not being completely kind. I'm trying to paint myself out of the corner that I just put myself in. But I really appreciate you coming to this interview with such vulnerability and really opening up, and even getting teary when you broke your promise,
I
and you
did
got
not
to.
cry. I got teary. I choked it back. Bro, come on.
Okay.
I manned
Okay. Well,
up.
you didn't weep. You
There we
didn't
go.
weep.
As
Okay.
long as I'm not like,
But I really appreciate speaking with you. I hope we can speak again, and I'll plug your work in the description. Maybe I'll even delay this a little bit so people can go right over to the channel when it's ready. But I really
okay,
appreciate your work, and
don't
yeah,
delay it. It's okay.
your earnestness and putting yourself out there, even though it does have. I mean, maybe it's speeding up your own recovery to put yourself in this position. Maybe not.
Actually, I think it is. The first time a conservative man called me sir, I cried. I never got to grow up to be like a respected man.
Hmm.
Um, so, and I had like this existential moment where I realized, well, I never got to grow up to be a man. Nobody's ever addressed me as sir or Mr. respectfully.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's healing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. If there's
Absolutely.
anything I can ever do, let me know.
Well, I'll have you back on for sure. For sure. I'm going to end
Okay.
the recording now. Thank you.